It's great to see such a big audience. I think it's the biggest audience gathering of people that we've had for a meeting of the Nottingham Secular Society. But then we do have... Oh, right. Thank you. Right. Okay. And we do have a very special speaker here tonight, as you know. I'm sure pretty well everyone will be aware and somewhat familiar with Peter Tachell. I've been aware for a very long time, first remembering hearing about him at the time of a certain unfortunate by-election 30 years ago, which he'll probably like to forget. He probably regards as a lucky escape. And we've probably read about the Peter Tachell Foundation, of which there are many leaflets here, and about the very extensive work that Peter does in civil rights and in gay rights and the encounters with friends of Mr. McGarvey, etc. Oh, right. I did think my voice might carry. I used to get accused of having a playground voice. That's better, is it? Oh, right, you can all hear me now. It's probably all these columns and the echoes. Right. Well, with little more ado, Peter is going to talk to us tonight about organised religion being the greatest threat to human rights worldwide. That's his topic. He's going to talk to us for about 40 minutes, and then there'll be plenty of time for question and answer. And I expect there will be quite a lively and interesting discussion at that point. So I'll hand over to Peter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start by giving my thanks to the Nottingham Secular Society for hosting this meeting, and of course for all of you for coming here tonight to participate in this meeting and the discussion that will follow. As you've heard, the theme of tonight is the rather provocative, contentious idea that organised religion is the greatest threat to human rights worldwide. Of course, there are many different threats to human rights. There are political, ideological, cultural, and economic threats to human rights. But I would say that assessing human rights in the totality across the world as a whole, organised religion is the single greatest threat to human rights. I say that because wherever we look in the world today, we see religious organisations campaigning against human rights, against equality, against inclusion and diversity. Of course, not all religious people subscribe to these anti-human rights agendas. There are many individual people of faith who take a stand against human rights abuses, and indeed in many instances are in the forefront of the battles for equality and human rights. I think, for example, of the late Archbishop Oscar Romero in El Salvador, who paid with his life for defending the poor and excluded and marginalized. I think of, back in the 1930s, Dorothy Day and the Catholic worker in the United States, who took a powerful stand against corporate interests and the abuse of working class people by big business, and who fought long and hard to ensure that all American citizens received fair and equal treatment. I think also of Martin Luther King and the Black Civil Rights Movement in the United States in the 1950s and 60s. Their heroic role in challenging segregation in the Deep South and the denial of voting rights to African Americans was a pivotal part of the success of African Americans in winning equality and freedom. And these were all people motivated by faith, whose faith interpretation led them to support struggles against injustice. But I would say that nevertheless, sadly, organised religion has mostly been on the wrong side of history. Mostly on the wrong side of history. I look at the role, for example, of Christian fundamentalists in many, many different countries. In the United States, for example, in the US, that great bastion of democracy, we have an example of Christian fundamentalists who are fighting tooth and nail to deny equal rights to women. In particular, the right of women to control their own fertility. You know, the campaign against a woman's choice over abortion is being spearheaded by Christian extremists, who in some very extreme cases have even gone as far as assassinating doctors who have been involved in terminating unwanted pregnancies. We also, of course, see the role of organised religion in challenging bids for lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender equality. The big battle against same-sex marriage in the United States is being led at the forefront by religious zealots who do not believe in equality for all American citizens. Likewise, although there are some people of faith who support the abolition of the death penalty, others of faith are fighting tooth and nail to sustain it. So that is a really, really big, big problem when you have organised religion in one of the great supposed democracies championing opposition to equality. I'm just going to pause now to ask if we can get rid of the background music from the speakers. Is that possible? Can anybody ask the pub owners to get rid of the background music? In addition, of course, Christian fundamentalists in the United States have spearheaded campaigns to oppose sex and relationship education in schools and to oppose the provision of condoms for people at risk of HIV. So you can see that even in the United States, supposedly a well-developed democracy, we have very significant influence of Christian fundamentalists. In Nigeria, we see the internecine warfare, and it is literally warfare, between Christian and Muslim extremists, which has claimed the lives of so many innocent civilians in bombing attacks and retaliatory pogroms. We see also the witch hunts against so-called witches in Nigeria, where people who are different or who are deemed to have brought a family bad luck are sometimes designated as witches by Christian fundamentalist pastors, who then authorize or organize the beating often of young children to drive out the devil in them. In Nigeria just recently, earlier this month, we saw the coming into force of a new draconian anti-gay law, which not only bans same-sex marriage, a demand that no gay Nigerian was asking for, but also, very importantly, bans LGBT organizations and events. In fact, any advocacy for same-sex rights is banned completely under this new law, with draconian sentences applicable. In Uganda, just this very day, President Museveni has signed the anti-homosexuality bill, another extreme draconian anti-gay law that increases the existing penalty of life imprisonment for anal intercourse to cover all other same-sex acts, even mere kissing and touching. even mere kissing and touching between people of the same sex now carries a maximum penalty from today of life imprisonment. Plus, there's a blanket ban on gay organisations and gay equality advocacy. And that has been driven by a combination of US evangelists like Scott Lively, who've been to Uganda to stir up anti-gay sentiment, and homegrown pastors and preachers like Martin Semper and others. This is very much an agenda in Nigeria and in Uganda that is driven by Christian fundamentalists and to some extent by Muslim extremists as well. In Russia, we see the role of the Orthodox Church in supporting the crackdown on LGBT people. You know, the new law passed, enacted last summer, prohibits any kind of gay visibility or advocacy in a situation where a young person under 18 might see it. So there's no requirement for them to actually see or witness it, but just in the circumstances that they might see it. And people have been arrested for merely displaying a rainbow flag and for displaying a sign, homosexuality is normal, even though there's not any evidence that a person under 18 witnessed it. And that law was driven in part by the Russian Orthodox Church, which now wants to go a step further and totally recriminalize homosexuality to make it completely illegal again, as it was in the Stalin era. Religious fanatics are also involved in some of the extremist groups that regularly attack gay rights parades or attempted gay rights parades in Moscow and other cities. I myself was attacked in 2007 by a Russian Orthodox priest wielding a gold crucifix. He didn't get me, but he did attack and beat others. So you can see that in many different countries, organized Christian fundamentalism is very much in the forefront of attacking human rights. If you look at Judaist extremism, for example, in Israel, we see that religious fundamentalists have long opposed and tried to stop women from praying at the Wailing Wall. They've argued that this is a male-only space and that no Jewish woman, however devout, should have a right to pray at the Wailing Wall. They're also instrumental in the ongoing illegal new settlements in occupied territories, believing and demanding that the whole region belongs to Israel and that no Israeli, Arab or Palestinian has a right to be there. They've also played a role in trying to block and sometimes even attack attempts to hold gay pride parades. Not all Jewish people, of course, hold to these extremist views, but the religious fundamentalists within Israel have played this very negative reactionary role, and indeed actively sought to scupper any kind of peace deal with the Palestinian people. If we take a look at Islamist fundamentalism, we see a similar pattern. In Iran, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and many other Muslim majority countries, we see, first and foremost, the persecution of fellow Muslims who don't fit and accord with the orthodoxy. So, for example, in Iran, which is a Shia Muslim-dominated state, Sunni Muslims are persecuted. Their religious places of worship, their religious teachers and students often suffer great harassment, and extreme circumstances, imprisonment. We see in Saudi Arabia, a Sunni Muslim majority state, the persecution of Shia Muslims. And of course, people of other faiths, Christians, Baha'i and others. In Pakistan, we have witnessed horrendous persecution of Shia Muslims, Ahmadiyya Muslims, Sufi Muslims, plus Christians and others. In fact, according to the latest research, it appears that globally, Christians are the most persecuted religious faith in the world today. They're not the only persecuted faith, but they are the most persecuted, with hundreds of millions of Christians at risk of persecution ranging from hate attacks to attacks upon their homes and churches to false imprisonment charges of blasphemy to outright murder and bombings. Some of you may recall last year the horrendous attack by Islamist extremists on a Christian church in Peshawar, which left nearly 100 people dead. A shocking, outrageous attack upon another religious minority. Right now we're witnessing horrendous violence between Christians and Muslims in the Central African Republic. You know, a scale of violence motivated by religious intolerance and bigotry. And it's for all these reasons that I am a secularist. Secularism is not the same as anti-clericalism. Secularism simply believes in a separation between religion and the state. That the state should not favour or privilege any one faith. It should be neutral. It should be a neutral space which protects all faiths and people with no faith. The atheists, humanists, agnostics, secularists should have the same protections, the same rights as people of faith, and that no faith should be dominant. Here in Britain, we are often referred to as a secular society, and in many respects we are. But even here we still do have the Church of England as the official established church. A third of all our schools in Britain are faith schools. As of right, 26 Anglican bishops sit in the House of Lords with the right to speak and vote on legislation. Together with Iran, the British Parliament is the only legislature in the world that gives clerics an automatic right to sit in the legislature. But generally, I'd say, we have made progress towards a distance between the state and faith. It's true, of course, that since the advent of New Labour, religious organisations have had privileged access to government. New Labour decided that there were votes in faith organisations, so they decided to bring faith organisations into the government consultation process. And since Tony Blair became Prime Minister, faith organisations are regularly consulted about all major legislation. They have regular meetings and receptions in number 10 Downing Street. No human rights or civil liberties organisation has the same privileged access. Amnesty International, or Human Rights Watch, or Liberty, or Justice, none of these organisations are consulted to the same degree on government legislation as faith organisations and faith leaders. And of course it is faith leaders are the ones who get to represent to government, even when those faith leaders are often out of touch with their grassroots members. So for example, during the league battle against same-sex marriage, faith leaders lined up, almost without exception, to oppose equal marriage for everyone, even though 58% of people of faith supported equal marriage. So the faith leaders were not representing their own faith communities. They were out of step. But the government still gave them that privileged listening, that privileged access. If we want to move towards a better, more humane society, of course, people of faith are entitled to lobby and have their views known. I'm not objecting to that. They have a right, like everyone else, to lobby, to pressure, to campaign. What they don't have is the right to privilege access, to be given special access to government ministers, special consultation, and to have written into legislation special exemptions. I'm sure you're all aware of the range of fantastic, brilliant new equality laws we have in Britain to protect people against discrimination in employment, housing, education, the provision of goods and services. But in nearly all those laws, there are limited, qualified exemptions granted to faith organisations. So faith organisations are not required to avoid discrimination to the same extent as everyone else. They are, in essence, above the law. If they can demonstrate that it's against their faith ethos, they are entitled under the equality laws to discriminate. And I think that is fundamentally wrong, because in a democratic society, we should all be equal before the law, with the same rights and the same responsibilities. And just because you're a person of faith doesn't mean that you have a right to discriminate. I'm glad to say that there are many people of faith who hold exactly the same view. There are people of faith who say, yes, we, as religious people and religious organisations, should be held to the same standards as everyone else. Now, under these exemptions do not just apply to religious organisations and places of worship. They also apply to faith-run schools, hospitals, nursing homes, and shelters for the homeless. All these faith-run bodies, in certain limited circumstances, if they can show that it's contrary to their religious ethos, they have the right under British law to discriminate. That is fundamentally wrong. And I've got to say, sadly, these exemptions were brought in by a Labour government. A Labour government that professed a commitment to equality and human rights for all. Also in Britain, we see in certain sections the rise of Islamist fundamentalism. I use the word Islamist, which is not the same as Islam. We need to make a very clear distinction between Muslim people in general and Islamists. Islamists believe that the law of the land should be run on religious lines. They want to establish a theocratic religious dictatorship where everybody, whoever you are, is subject to their particular hardline interpretation of Islam. Most Muslim people in this country do not share that view. But these Islamists are very well organized and very, very vocal. Just last week, a London university hosted one of these religious extremists. A university, a place supposedly of enlightenment, gave this man a platform despite his long record of espousing the denial of human rights to women, to lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender people, and to Muslims, fellow Muslims, who don't conform to his hardline interpretation of Islam. He was given an unchallenged platform in a London university only last week. That's wrong. That's wrong. He is entitled to free speech, objectionable though his views are. But I don't think anybody should give him or anyone else an unchallenged, unquestioned platform, given what they are on record as saying. Those views need to be challenged. When a man like him justifies female genital mutilation, which involves taking a young girl aged 8 or 9 and cutting out all or part of her clitoris to deny her sexual pleasure in later life, that is a crime against humanity. And people who advocate that should be challenged. My question is, where were the feminists at that meeting to challenge him? They were absent. Women who proclaim women's rights were absent. They allowed him to speak. They never called him to account for all the other sexist ideas that he promotes. Where were the LGBT campaigners who also allowed him to appear unchallenged? Now, I agree we shouldn't overestimate the power and influence of these people. But we do need to recognize, although they are a very clear minority in the Muslim community, they do have influence. And they are recruiting some young people to their perverse interpretation of Islam. And it's often, that's how extremism starts. It starts with anti-Semitism, misogyny, and homophobia, and the radicalization process continues. So that some of these people who end up doing terrible things, that's how they began. They began with low-level prejudice, which was unchallenged, which no one bothered to take them to account for, which nobody questioned, and so they graduated into the clutches of more extreme Islamists who got them to justify more extreme behavior. So challenging extremism from whatever source, whether it be Islamist or Christian fundamentalist, Jewish fundamentalist, Hindu fundamentalist, or the extremism of the EDL or the BNP, all these extremisms need to be challenged. Because if we don't, the people who perpetrate them will gain the confidence to carry on with their hateful agenda. We need to argue against their ideas, to counter their bad ideas with better ideas, to show that hate is not a humanitarian value, to show that hate has no place in a humane society. We need to send the signal of zero tolerance towards those who use religion as a guise for their hatred. Because in many instances, I believe that religion is being used by some people to justify their prejudices. We can all have a debate about religion and the holy texts, but I think there's probably a general consensus that even if we think that religion is a form of superstition, that it's irrational, even if we think that, the core underlying values of all the major faiths are love and compassion. Love and compassion distorted, perverted, and contradicted by the teaching of many of great religious leaders. Look at the new Pope, Pope Francis. A lot of people say, wow, he's a breath of fresh air. Such a contrast with the past. A progressive pope at last. Well, hang on a moment. In tone, he is better than his predecessors. The way he expresses things is an improvement on Benedict and John Paul. But he hasn't changed one iota the bigoted, intolerant teachings of the Church. The Catechism, with its hateful remonstrations against gay people, for example, hasn't been altered by one jot. The Church's opposition to fertility treatment for childless couples, a policy devoid of all compassion, remains in place. Still, Pope Francis says, no woman on earth has the moral or intellectual capacity to be a priest. What a damning insult to every woman on this planet. He's also still opposed to embryo research, which could potentially find cures for new diseases and old diseases. He's on record as opposing any real, genuine equality for LGBT people. He's against same-sex marriage and said so only just a few days ago. He doesn't believe that people of faith should have a right to choose. So LGBT people of faith, as far as he's concerned, they should remain banned from marriage. By supporting a ban on same-sex marriage, Pope Francis is supporting discrimination. So, looking at the Catholic Church, which has 1 billion adherents worldwide, we actually see that on many issues, it is on the wrong side of history. But I'll add a caveat. When it comes to social justice and global development, the Catholic Church actually says, or often says, some very good things. Likewise, some of the fundamentalist Muslim and Judaist leaders on social justice and global development, often they say good things. And I'm sure you're all aware that during the Jubilee debt campaign a few years ago, the campaign to cancel the debts of the poorest countries in the world, it was often many Christians who were in the forefront of that battle. And indeed people of other faiths as well. So it's a mixed picture. But overall, I would say that organized religion, the religious leaders, are the single greatest threat to human rights worldwide. And we have to challenge that. We have to support those people within those faith communities who believe in the principle of universal human rights, who make a distinction between their own personal views and what the law of the land should say. And I'll be asked to be forgiven if I reference my own family. Even to this day, my mother, who probably is a borderline Christian fundamentalist, even to this day, she believes that homosexuality is wrong. It says so in the Bible. She believes the Bible. I keep on saying to her, well, look, Jesus Christ condemned many sins, but there's no record in the Bible of him ever condemning homosexuality. But then she references the Old Testament. To which I say, well, in the Old Testament it says that I should be killed. You don't believe that, do you? She shakes her head. But also, although she does believe that homosexuality is a sin, because the Bible says so, she doesn't see it as a major sin. And moreover, she also sees homophobia as a sin. I remember when I marched to the pulpit of the Archbishop of Canterbury in 1998, Dr. George Carey, to criticise his support for anti-gay discrimination in law. My mother said to me afterwards, "Did you really have to do that?" She said, "I can understand why you oppose discrimination, but did you really have to do that?" And I said, "Well, look, we tried to meet with the Archbishop of Canterbury for 8 years. He wouldn't meet us. He slammed the door in our face. So we had no option but to go to his cathedral on Easter Sunday, the biggest day of the year, when all the media were there, to publicly expose Dr. George Carey's support for legal discrimination against lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender people." To which my mother said, "Okay, fair enough." And I suspect there are a lot of people of faith like that in this country. The most recent British Social Attitude Survey found that over a third of the British public, even today, still believe that homosexuality is mostly or always wrong. Over a third. Well, that's a big improvement on the 1980s, when over 2/3 believe that. So it's gone down. Public opinion is changing in the right direction. But still, just over a third, that's a lot. But I suspect that many of those people are like my mother. Because of reasons of faith or whatever, they don't agree with homosexuality and they think it's wrong. But in their own personal relations, they would not discriminate or treat badly a gay or lesbian person. They would support equal rights. They'd make a distinction between their personal view and what the law of the land should say. And this is my mother's view. She says, to quote her religious precept, she says, "God gives us a choice. No one's compelled to be a Christian or to believe in the Bible, it's your choice. So therefore, compelling people by using the law of the land is totally at odds with Christian values." And I just wish that more leaders of faith could make that distinction between their personal view and what the law of the land itself says. At the end of the day, whoever we are, whatever our background, whatever our culture, whatever our family history, we're all human beings and we all deserve equal human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter.